Hi guys, this is the first video in my budget and finance series. Last week I put up a video allowing you to ask questions that you would like me to cover throughout this series, and I received a lot of really great questions, so I'm just going to be answering those throughout this set of videos. Today I wanted to talk about 7 common money mistakes. I thought this would be a good place to start. A lot of the videos that I plan to do will kind of answer some of these things and help with some of these common money mistakes. So the first one that I see is not having a budget or not knowing exactly what is coming in and what is going out. A budget doesn't need to feel negative. It should really feel freeing. And by that I mean knowing exactly what is coming in, knowing exactly what you have to pay, knowing that you have money in savings is a very freeing thing. A budget isn't just for people who are living paycheck to paycheck or have a large amount of debt to pay off. I think everyone should have a budget, and that way it's there in black and white. You know exactly what you need to pay. You know that you have set aside money for savings, for retirement, for college, and that way when you do want to make a purchase, if you have the money, you don't need to feel guilty. You don't need to sit and wonder, oh, if I spend this $100 or so, is it going to take away from me being able to make my car payment later this month? You'll know exactly what money you have, and it is a very freeing thing. So I highly recommend, if you don't have a budget, that you start one. I'm going to show you how to do that, but what you can do to start is keep track of all of the money that you have coming in and know exactly what that is, and then all of the money going out. So you can look at your statements for whatever bills you need to pay, but you can also go back and look through your checkbook to see how much money you're spending on things like groceries or gas. You can look at your credit card statements if you use credit cards and just get an idea. Another thing that you can do is for a month or several months, just keep track of what you're spending on each thing, and that will give you a better idea for when you go to make your budget. But like I said, I am going to show you how to do a basic budget. I plan to answer a lot of questions that I received on budgeting. Another very common money mistake that I see is only one person in the marriage doing the finances. Now, it's perfectly fine for one person to write up the budget, one person to pay the bills. But what can really be a problem is if only one person knows what's going on, if only one person knows what the car payment is, the mortgage, and how much you spend on groceries, all of the insurances and things like that. And the reason why both partners should be involved is because one person shouldn't really have all that pressure on them. I think both partners should know what's going on, and that way one doesn't have to be the Scrooge or the nag while the other one doesn't really know what's going on financially and may want to spend more. And that way you have open communication. Both people know exactly what's going on, and also you never know. Something could happen, and then, you know, one spouse is left not knowing, you know, what company you use for car insurance or where the life insurance policy is or things like that. And we don't really like to think about that, but it does happen. I think both partners should be involved in the finances. I also think it's important to view it as our money instead of, you know, my husband's money, my money, because it can really create conflict. I think I'm going to talk more about budgeting and things like that, like I mentioned. I think each person should have some money that, you know, they can spending money and things like that. But I think it does help in marriage if you just see it as our money, especially if there is a stay-at-home spouse who isn't bringing in an income or isn't making as much as the other. If you just look at it as our income, I think it can really help in marriage. I think you have to be honest in your finances. I hear so many things, and I've talked to a lot of people where one person is hiding credit card purchases and being dishonest, and I think that can really affect a marriage. So I think both people need to be involved. I think you need to be honest with your spouse, and it will not only help your finances, but it'll also help your marriage as well. And to the single people, and we talk about this with our children, but I think finances is something that you definitely need to talk about with your future spouse. You're going to be married with them. Your finances are going to be combined whether you want them to be or not. That is usually how it is seen legally. So you want to make sure that you have those conversations before you get married. Make sure that you're both on the same page, and then throughout your marriage just have open conversation with finances, and make sure that both people know what's going on. I think another problem is living to the max. So for example, you have two people in the marriage and you both have great jobs where you've worked yourself up in your career and you're being paid very well, and then you go to get your mortgage and your car payments and every other thing based on both of you making that money. I believe in living below your means, because if something happened and you've worked your way up in a career and you get laid off, or they need to downsize or reduce your income, or an accident happens, you might not be able to go and find another job where you start out making that much money. So it's very dangerous to live at the max of your income. You always want to make sure that you're going to be able to pay your mortgage and your car payments and everything else. So I would say just make sure that you don't get your mortgage and your car payments and all of that based on always making the most that you can possibly make. A lot of times when you get pre-approved for a mortgage, they will pre-approve you for way more than you can actually afford. And I'm going to talk a lot more about that, but just make sure that you can actually pay it. If they give you a mortgage for X amount of dollars and you're approved for that much, don't just assume that you can make that payment, because there are some things that they don't factor in. For us, we send our kids to private school and that doesn't show up on our credit reports, but that is a chunk of money that we have to pay each month. So we need to make sure when we get a mortgage that we can actually afford it and not just go by what the bank says that we can afford. Another common problem is not saving at all, or not saving for retirement, or starting a job and using all of the money that you're making, and then you want to go back and start saving, and you're already used to spending that certain amount each month. I tell my kids, and I will continue to tell them, that it is best to start when you're young, just putting a certain percentage, which usually they recommend 10% or even more if you can, towards retirement and towards savings, because if you start spending it, you're just going to get used to spending it, and it will get a lot harder to live on less. But if you just have it taken out right from the get-go, you won't have to worry about it. I'm going to talk a lot more about savings and how to save and retirement and things like that in future videos, but that is definitely a common money mistake, and I would definitely recommend if you're starting a new job, or if you're just out of college, to have that money taken out right away so you aren't used to living off of it. And I'll talk more about things like if they don't offer a retirement plan at your job in future videos, but I just wanted to mention that because I think that is definitely a common mistake. Another common mistake is not having any money set aside for emergencies. Sometimes we save up for vacation, and we save up for this, and we save up for retirement and college fund, but we don't put money aside for car repairs or home repairs or anything. We just live on our set budget, and we forget that life happens, things happen, things break, sometimes we need to replace things, and I will be talking about that when I do the budget, but I definitely think we need to have an emergency fund, not just an emergency fund if you happen to lose your job and you need to make mortgage payments and things like that, but a yearly fund where you can take money out for things like if your washer breaks, or your lawnmower breaks, or your car needs new tires, and all of those things. You should have money set aside for those. So if you're paying your bills every month and then you need to make a car repair, well, where does the money come from? It has to come from somewhere, and either you will charge it because you don't have the money, or it needs to come out of your monthly expenses, and it will keep messing things up for you and be very frustrating. So I'm going to talk about all of that, talk about putting money aside for everything pretty much, so that you have the money and it isn't going to mess up your monthly expenses. Another mistake that I see a lot, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard about this, is paying the minimum on credit card debt or any debt. We all know that we have to pay interest if we don't pay it off in full. And a lot of times we use our credit cards, and say we are out shopping and we see this great deal on a sweater or a handbag or something, and we just put it on our credit card. Well, if you don't pay that in full, you're paying interest on it. If you just make the minimum payment, you would be shocked at how much you actually end up paying for that sweater or that handbag that you thought you got a good deal on, and you'll just be paying it forever pretty much. So definitely, if you use credit cards, I know some people don't use them at all. We try to use them for our benefit by getting points, but we always pay them in full. I hate paying interest. It just seems like such a waste of money. If you don't have the money to pay it off when the bill comes, it really isn't worth it, especially if it's for something like a sweater or a handbag. And the last money mistake that I wanted to mention is being too cheap or too strict with your budget. What I mean by that is some things are just worth saving for, waiting until you can afford a high quality product. Some things it doesn't really matter, you know, I go to the Dollar Tree for things like magic erasers and things like that. But I remember when we first moved to this house, we were on, you know, a fairly tight budget. You know, we could pay our bills and everything, but extra things we tried to save money on, and sometimes we would get things like a hose or a hose nozzle, and we would get something that was really inexpensive, and then it would break and we would have to replace it. So we learned very quickly some things are just worth, you know, paying a little extra and getting something of higher quality. Also, I think you can waste a lot of money by going to dollar stores or thrift stores. I think they're great, but if you're always going to the dollar store and spending $10 here, $10 there, or going thrift shopping, you know, every weekend, while you're trying to save money, you could actually be hurting yourself. I've also seen people be so strict with their budget that they don't feel very free. And I know sometimes if you've gotten into a lot of debt, or you know, some emergency happened, that you have to be really strict and there's just no way around it. But sometimes I've seen where every little dime had to be accounted for, and it can feel too controlling. So I kind of like to have a balance, and that way it does feel freeing to have a budget instead of so controlling. I hope this was helpful. I am going to do a lot more videos. Thank you so much for watching.